Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of The Thoughtful Bro. I'm psyched to have the great Stephen Graham Jones here with us today to talk about his book, The Buffalo Hunter, which is getting like all the praise. I mean, Stephen usually gets a lot of praise and he's got like a rabid core following. This one seems to be really, the good word seems to be spreading. So really psyched to have him on to talk about Buffalo Hunter. We are live streaming as always on Facebook and YouTube. We're here to talk about what makes great books tick, what makes great authors tick. A Mighty Blaze, in case you didn't know, is an all-volunteer initiative connecting writers and readers virtually. We started in COVID, and here we are, 6 years later, going strong. If you want to show us the love, we're not asking for money. Like I said, we're all volunteer. Just tell your friends about us or repost us or follow us on social media. But if you are in the mood to spend money, I have an idea. Spend it on books that reinvent the vampire genre for the American West with a lot of blood, guts, humor, and meaning along the way. Books like The Buffalo Hunter by the always gory, always funny, always heartfelt Stephen Graham Jones. We'll put a link to buy that book through bookshop.org in the chat. And regarding questions, just post them in the comments. We'll try to get to as many as we can at the end. And now, on to this week's fabulous guest. Stephen Graham Jones is the New York Times bestselling author of over 35 novels and collections, as well as a number of novellas and comic books. The novels include Mongrels, The Only Good Indians, the Indian Lake Trilogy, and I Was a Teenage Slasher, among other distinctions, and there are many. Stephen has won the LA Times Ray Bradbury Prize, the Mark Twain American Voice in Literature Award, 4 Bram Stoker Awards, 3 Shirley Jackson Awards, and 6 This Is Horror Awards. He's also been inducted into the Texas Literary Hall of Fame. He's been a finalist for the World Fantasy Award. And his latest book, as I've said, is The Buffalo Hunter. It's a work of historical horror about an Indian vampire. The New York Times calls it a gruesome joyride of a novel. And the LA Times Book Review said it's a masterpiece. This is the novel which Jones does all the things he always does, but even better than before. Stephen Graham Jones, welcome to The Thoughtful Bro.
Man, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right, I am psyched for this conversation. I know this book has been like blowing up, and you've been talking to Hollywood about it and stuff. So I know you're a busy guy. You're out and traveling more next week, I understand. So thanks for being here. But like to get us started, why don't you just give us like a thumbnail of this book?
A journal is found in the crumbling wall of a parsonage up in Miles City, Montana. Turns out to be written by a Lutheran pastor in 1912. That journal records a series of visits a Blackfeet guy made to this church, and it's a series of interviews. It's a confession. It's a dialogue between a priest and someone who claims to, drink blood to sustain his life.
Yeah, man. Yeah. This book works on multiple levels. We're going to get into it, but it's just sort of, it works on the surface level, obviously, as like a horror and gore story, but there's a lot here to dig into. But I'll start with vampires. I mean, I would just say that like vampires for me has always been tough as a genre. I think it's because there's something sexually transgressive about it. There's just, that kind of slender, pale, night-walking, refined aristocrat. That is not the kind of vampire that we see here. You have kind of exploded and reconstituted the vampire for your work. I think you were like teaching a course about vampires. Wrote this. I'm just kind of curious, like, why and how did you switch it up with vampires?
Well, I guess first of all, as you said in the introduction, I've done 35 plus books and none of them have been vampire books. And the reason that I haven't done a vampire novel is because exactly what you said. They're tricky, they're so, it's kind of like, I would suspect people who write fantasy have a similar problem with trying to step outside of Tolkien's Middle Earth, and with vampires, it's hard to step outside, Anne Rice or Dracula or I Am Legend or just some of the big canonical works. So it took me a while to figure it out, but what finally pushed me over into knowing I should write a vampire novel was I was looking at my list of stories one day, and I'd published a lot of vampire stories, and they weren't consistent with each other. They weren't drawing from the same well of lore or culture or biology or anything. But I did finally get interested enough in them to teach that graduate course in the vampire. It was called Writing the Vampire, and in it we read through all the books that we had time for, and just distilled out the characteristics, the story dynamics, all that kind of stuff. And that helped me come up with how my vampires should work. Because I think over the many, many centuries of retellings of vampire stories, there's been stuff that has accrued or has like glommed onto the vampire mythos, like can't walk into a house without invitation, or can fly, or turn to mist, or just so many different things that were basically story grease for one instance of a story. But that story was successful, and so it got coded into the DNA of the animal. And then the result is that we have this creature that I think doesn't make really good biological or cultural sense. It's got all these conflicting characteristics and abilities. And so I felt like for me to believe in this thing enough to write about it for 400 odd pages, I had to strip away a whole lot of the stuff and kind of basically get down to something very similar to what Catherine Bigelow and Eric Red did in Near Dark, just a stripped down, basic, bare bones vampire.
Awesome. Steven, I actually want to pause for a second. Do you have headphones that you could use? Because I think what's going on is my audio is going into your mic, and I'm hearing a little bit of the echo on my own.
No.
Folks, stick with us just for 1 second.
Let me look at my settings here. Yes, it's going.
All right.
It should be going through here now.
All right, good. Yeah, I'm not hearing the same feedback. Good. Cool. Yes, I'm not hearing it anymore. Awesome. Cool. All right. So, I was thinking about vampires and just sort of like the symbolism of vampires and sort of like what they mean. And I think it's interesting what you just said about how it's not, it kind of doesn't work culturally. You know, Ryan Coogler just put out Sinners, right? And it's like, here's another vampire film that's doing a lot kind of culturally with Black history in America. Your book is doing a lot with Native American history. I'm just kind of like, first of all, did you see Sinners?
I did.
Yeah, what'd you think?
Oh, I thought it was a great time, man. I really like that dance hall scene when they first are playing the music and all the timelines are laid on top of each other. It's really beautiful.
Yeah. And I guess I just think like there is just something about kind of like one culture, like, you know, taking over another and withdrawing resources from it that lends itself to, you know, this vampire thing. And I think it's kind of, there's an obvious way to interpret that with Sinners, and certainly there's more than an allegory to that film, but like that's a thing that you can lay over it. And I'm just wondering, like, you know, I have a feeling that you are just a kind of like pure pantser, and you just kind of write and you leave the interpretation to others. I have a feeling I've heard you say those kinds of things before, but I do just want to ask you, like, you know, there's a lot that one could read into using a vampire when talking about Native American history. Were you doing that intentionally? Were you thinking about that at all? Or were you just like gunning because you got a cool vampire story?
I was mostly just gunning with a cool vampire story, but I think probably at some level I did have like a little nascent awareness that, you know, vampires suck the blood out of this or that. And that's a large part of what colonialism is. I probably had some dim awareness, but I'm always, anytime I register something like that, I try to stuff it back down, because that to me is not helpful to telling a good story. That's helpful to doing criticism. It's helpful to analysis. It's helpful to understanding a story, and it's not at all bad work to be doing. But if I try to code that in from the beginning, then I'm always afraid it's going to come off didactic or preachy or designed for English majors. And I always just want to tell a fun story if I can.
Well, let me ask you, like, many people are talking about that in this kind of like critical and English, you know, PhD student kind of way. Do you think that symbolism is there? Even though you don't try to think about it, you don't intend to do it, and maybe you might even argue it's even more present or more present in a meaningful way because it was sort of done organically, unconsciously. I'm just wondering, like, do you think it's sort of like having a non-approach to that stuff is actually a kind of approach, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. You know, I used to, about 10, 15 years ago, for some reason, for a few years, I was doing events with Percival Everett a lot, and his books, people have grand theories about how it all works,
Right.
and so after these events, people would come up to him and they'd say, "Mr. Everett, does in this in erasure, does this mean that, and
Mm.
is this actually an accurate read and a good interpretation?" And I watched Percival, and he would always just say yes. He said yes to every single read, every single interpretation. And I
Yeah.
really respected that because
Mm.
I don't think we as writers, we don't have authority over the story. I can't tell somebody no, you're wrong, because I don't have any idea what's going on in my own head, and therefore I don't really know what's going on the page. What I know are levers and pulleys and switches, and that's mechanical stuff that I build a story with and on and maybe around. And I can do that stuff. I can do that pretty well. But as far as interpreting it, I just yeah, that's just way beyond me. I mean, I can do it if I'm reading someone else's stuff,
Yeah.
but doing it to my own stuff feels weird and dangerous even,
Dangerous how?
because I wonder if I might become someone who writes for the critics, and I never
Mm.
want to do that. I want to
Mm.
write for the readers. I mean, I'm not saying critics can't be readers. Ideally, that's how all critics start out as readers, but they have to adopt a way of going into text that opens them up for
Mm.
a larger group of people or for their peers or someone. And that's wonderful and valid and beautiful, and I love to read that kind of stuff, but it doesn't help me write better books. Like, maybe an example of that would be, I just taught a big monsters lecture course, and the popular way to talk about monsters is as expressions of a culture. Like,
Mm.
we had like, the zombie came out of Haiti because of permanent enslavement being the boogeyman of a whole culture, that kind of stuff, and that's
Mm.
totally valid, 100% good. But that's not the kind of stuff I teach in my monsters course. In my monsters course, I'm asking questions like, so if a werewolf has tall ears, is it likely to be on all fours, or is it likely to stand on two legs? That's the kind of stuff I'm so interested in. I'm never interested in the cultural studies read. I'm always interested in the does this creature make sense as a creature read.
Yeah. I love that, man. So the book, a central event in the book is the Marias massacre. Am I pronouncing that right? The Marias.
I always say Marias, but yeah.
Marias, okay. The Marias massacre of Blackfeet Indians that occurred around 1870, right when all the Great Plains Wars were really culminating, like 6 years before
Mhm.
Custer and Crazy Horse and Little Bighorn. I guess what I'm wondering is, like, was that a thing? Did you know going into the book, this is something I want to write about? I want a new way into this material, or again, was it just cooking with a good vampire story, and it's like, need a climactic event? Here's something, I'll just put it in there. Like, which came first, sort of?
I think it was that the me including the Marias massacre into the Buffalo Hunter is probably from two places. One place is I wanted to honor James Welch's novel Fool's Crow, which also engages that massacre, and I can't redo Fool's Crow. I can't even come close to doing anything as good as Fool's Crow, but I thought it would be a good way to honor that book, anyways, from which I used a lot of stuff. But the second is that the years from 1870 to 1884 were some tumultuous years for the Blackfeet. A lot of things changed, and so I wanted to document those years somewhat from the outside, from this vampire living up on the mountain, basically. And so if I'm going to go from 1870 to 1884, from the Marias Massacre to Starvation Winter, then I've got to hit both of those face on, both Starvation Winter and the Marias Massacre.
Yeah. I mean, I think, to me, this is like a lot of what great art is for. It's sort of, it's a way into material. And I mean, you just explained, kind of how it came about and everything. But it's just like, for me also, it's like, I've read a lot about the Native American conflicts. I've been out to that area and like seen the battlefield at Little Bighorn and just spent some time out there. But it's like, at some point you can like only hear about it like so many times in a certain way. And you need to access the emotions of something so huge and so it's like the Holocaust in a way, right? I mean, just to take another example, it's like, to access something so huge and so terrible, you just need a different kind of way to refract it a little bit. And so I found the book so valuable in that way.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I mean, hopefully it put the reader's feet on the ground a little bit, made them cold,
Yeah. So one of the things to me really elevated the book is the way Goodstab. So Goodstab is the main character of the book, and he is the vampire of the book. And he, I had going into the book, I was like, for sure, I know what's going to happen, right? I mean, of course, risky thing with a Stephen Graham Jones novel, say I know what's going to happen. Like, I don't even think you know what's going to happen. But like, I'm like, oh, this is a revenge story. Obviously, he's going to like feed on white people and so on. Like, that's going to be it. And there is some of that, but I think like what really elevates this book to a truly tragic character study is how he has to feed on his own people. And I just wanted you to like talk for a minute about that and like kind of the complexity of this character in that way.
You know, I think that comes from a book I read called Writing a TV Pilot by William Rabkin. A little bitty skinny book. So I think it's through Amazon, if I'm not mistaken. And it's talking just about how to create a television pilot that will have the right kind of conflict to not just last for a season, but for a whole series, like 20 seasons. And key to that is you've got to give or burden the main character with basically an unsolvable conflict. And so going into Buffalo Hunter, I asked myself, what would be an unsolvable conflict for this vampire? And I figured I could put his desires and his needs in direct opposition. He wants to be like the avenging angel for the Blackfeet people, for his tribe. But because of the way vampirism works in this world, where you take on the characteristics of that which you feed upon regularly. If you eat too many white-tailed deer, you start to get horns, that kind of stuff. Then he quickly finds that if he eats only buffalo hunters, he starts to turn into a buffalo hunter himself. Which is to say, if he wants to be the avenging angel for the Blackfeet, he has to eat Blackfeet to stay Blackfeet, you know? And how to solve that? There's really no way out of that, I don't think. And I really like to put my main characters in a serious bind like that when I can.
Oh yeah. I mean, even just hearing you talk about it, I'm just like kind of moved all over again. And I think you've just come up with like something just so genius. And it's just so sad. At the same time that it's so like the book is so, I mean, we're talking about, you know, the massacre, and we're talking about this kind of tragic figure, but it's like the book also has like a very exciting nail gun murder scene. And it's like there's parts of it that are just like absolutely insane and entertaining and just wild and funny. And I don't know. I mean, it's one of these, when there was I saw you laugh when I was like doing the introduction about how, like, you know, this one interviewer was saying, or the one reviewer was saying, that you're doing all the things you usually do, but better. And like, I mean, look, all your books are great, right? But there is something that is like so deep in that unresolvable conflict within Goodstab. I mean, let me just put that back to you. Actually, do you feel like you stepped into some kind of new zone, or like you created something that was like remarkable even by your own standards?
I don't know. I mean, tell you the truth, every book I publish, I think, well, I could have done better, you know. And I think that's why I keep writing more and more books, because I'm waiting to do it. I'm waiting to do it right, you know. So I think each book does a different thing. I figure a different thing out in each book, you know. I remember when back in 2008, I wrote Growing Up Dead in Texas. It came out in 2010, I think. And when I wrote that book, I thought, man, it's all downhill from here. I'll never write a book that good again, you know. And maybe I haven't. I mean, I'm not the one to say, but then I think Mongrels was another kind of like high point for me anyways. As a writer, it was bringing the two parts of myself together. And then Good Indians was another kind of high point, but so was Jade Daniels, and so was Tolly Driver and Teenage Slasher. So it's just, to me, it's just all, it's like I'm I feel like I'm Karate Cat. You remember that Karate Cat cartoon?
No.
He was just a cat who knew karate. I don't know. It wasn't anything sophisticated, but he was always karate tough and everything. And I feel like I'm Karate Cat, just running around like some landscape, trying to knock this down and knock that down. And I can't knock everything down at once, but I can knock one thing down at a time, you know? And so with each book, I'm knocking one thing down at a time. And as soon as I turn my back, it probably stands back up.
and it's an unresolvable conflict within you.
It is.
But with this book, like, what could you crystallize? Like, what is it that you figured out? Like, what did you do?
I think what I had fun with in this one was I don't know if I'd call it quite a nested narrative, but I'd call it like an encased narrative anyway.
Yeah.
It's like there's three levels of epistolary going on here. You know, there's the great granddaughter in 2012 transcribing her ancestor's journal, which in turn records Goodstab's confession.
Mhm.
And I love having to drop down through levels like that. And
Mhm.
you know, but you asked what I learned. I think what I learned was if you're gonna have different characters' voices, then it behooves you to come up with a set of like delimiters on each character's voice that you can fall
Mhm.
back on. Like,
Mhm.
which I had to do pretty early on. I had to figure out that, oh, Goodstab and Arthur Bocarn, they use coordinating conjunctions wildly differently. And also
Mhm.
Goodstab comes from the oral tradition. And so he is going to, in this sense, be acting his story out. Whereas Arthur comes from the Western tradition. He's going to be trying to shove it into words on the page.
Mhm.
And that just produces wildly different voices and dictions, I think. And
Mhm.
then Etsy at the outer level of all this encasement, she had access to everything. But like, every punctuation, every conjunction, all that stuff. But Arthur, he had those long, fun dashes, and Goodstab has no dashes.
Yeah.
And there's
Yeah.
a whole lot of I've got lists somewhere of who has what, and I had to make sure to keep that stuff straight.
It was actually pretty funny to hear Etsy
Mm.
speak in like the 2012
Mhm.
jargon next to like the Baroque flowering, like
Yeah.
Moby Dick like jargon of the pastern. Anyway, it was,
Mhm.
I thought the juxtapositions did a lot of extra kind of work and entertaining just in and of themselves.
Thank you.
So back to this question of critical praise for a moment. This book
Mhm.
is it's been called a masterpiece by like
Mhm.
multiple
Mhm.
big, like LA Times, NPR.
Mhm.
I guess I feel like I know what the answer is going to be, but I just was curious about like, your A, whether you care, but
Mhm.
B, do you feel like there's a reason for the kind of really, you know, top shelf like critical establishments coming out for this book?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a book about 150 plus years ago, but it's also a book that I think is about now. I mean, the if there's probably multiple theses you can extract from this book, but the one that I feel like um, wants to say itself is um, no matter how hard America tries to forget, these things happen nevertheless, you know? And I think we're in a moment right now where the world, or not the world, where America in very much particular
Mhm.
is trying to pretend like it got where it did with no
Mm.
bloody footsteps.
Mm. There's this line. I read through a bunch of reviews and Goodreads reviews of the book, and
Mhm,
there's this one line that everybody quotes, and I'm
mhm,
sure you know which one it is. It's when he says, "I'm America's worst nightmare, the Indian that never dies." And
mhm, mhm,
right there you have it. That's like
mhm,
also the story of the Indian that never dies, and that is a nightmare
mhm.
for a lot of people.
Oh, it is, yeah. Yeah, just our presence on the scene, on any scene, is a bad reminder for America. You know, it'd be so much easier for America if we'd all died in 1890. You know,
Mhm.
if we'd gone away, because
Mm.
we're just a reminder that all this land is stolen and everything we were tried. There was an attempted genocide. You know.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
Mhm,
Um, you have been talking to film studios about the book.
mhm,
I
mhm.
understand that's moving along,
Yeah.
but I've heard you talk about the question that they ask, which I think is probably a question they ask of anybody who did something historical. But the question is like, how does this connect to right now? Like, what
Mhm.
is like the message, or what will people latch on to that makes people think this isn't just a kind of period drama? That's self-contained. It's something that's talking about the world
Yeah.
today. What do you think about that question, and how do you answer it?
Yeah, I guess if I get asked that question by a studio exec, I would say Etsy probably encapsulates that to some extent. She's
Mhm.
the outside frame, and and what she's having to deal with is basically inherited sin. You know,
Mm,
how
mhm.
like should she feel like this is not her burden? Should she feel like this is something she needs to make up for? And I think that's a question America really needs to be asking itself right now.
Yeah. Yep. Let's talk about you just generally as a horror writer for a little bit, because there's a lot of things about your career that I find really fascinating, and I want to talk about kind of the way you write and how you see yourself within the genre of horror. But I guess just first, let me just ask you this question. You've probably been asked a million times before, but like, when did you realize that you were not just a writer but a horror writer? When did you realize that this was like the home for you?
You know, my very first story I ever wrote when I was 19 was a ghost story. So I started out in horror, but then I went into literary and kind of weird and cartoony stuff, you could say, for a couple of books. Then I came back home to serial killers, which is an avenue to horror anyways. And I want to say my fourth novel was a horror novel. 1, 2, 3, maybe it's my third novel, Demon Theory. Anyways, I think it was 05, 06, somewhere around there. So, but that wasn't actually when I felt like, hey, I'm just going to be a horror writer. I think that happened actually when I had a story accepted to Cemetery Dance, a story called Raphael. And Cemetery Dance, you know, in 06 was exactly where you wanted to be if you were doing horror. And, you know, I was reading the magazine, of course. And when that story got accepted there, and then they accepted Father, Son, Holy Rabbit months later, I thought, you know, this is where I belong in horror.
Yeah. You know, in Stephen King's On Writing, he just talks about, I can't remember exactly what he says, but I think the gist of one thing that he talks about in that book is just that, like, look, I can create characters. I can write great novels. I can tell stories, but the one thing that I know I can do, like better than anybody or on a world-class level, and that I can always fall back on in anytime I'm stuck, is I can scare people. You know, I can gross them out. I can scare people. I know how to do that. And of course he does. And it's funny, you made a comment recently in an interview, and you said, like, somebody was kind of prodding a little bit in the way that I was about kind of the meaning of the book. And you were just like, look, I just like to be bloody and funny. And there's a Stephen King element to that. There's a great humility in that as well. But I just I wanted to ask you about that. Like, is that just sort of like how you see the job description?
Yeah, I mean, my job description is I've got to have a cake, but I've got to put icing on it. You know, the icing is what brings the people to the cake. They don't come for that dry yellow stuff. They come for the sugary outsides, you know, and the bloody funny stuff is the sugary outsides. And so I have to always remember to lather that stuff on, you know, and it's not hard to remember because that's what I want to be doing most of all. The yellow cake is kind of boring. I just want to scoop all the icing off myself, you know?
Yep. You write a lot. I remember I saw you speak on a panel with Paul Tremblay at I forget the name of the conference, but it was in Quincy, Massachusetts.
Oh, ReaderCon, probably.
ReaderCon, yes, it was right before COVID. And I saw you speak on a panel, and Tremblay, I think, was the moderator, and he was like, "Oh, you know, Paul, I'm just so impressed. Sorry, I know it's Stephen. I'm so impressed with you. Like, you know, you were telling me that you were like writing a story on the airplane out here, and then I like read in the acknowledgments that you wrote this on an airplane or started it, and then they're also like, I think I heard you started your next book on an airplane as well. So I guess the first question is like, what is it about airplanes, and is like that where it all begins?
Well, I mean, what's wonderful about airplanes is I usually don't pay for the Wi-Fi, and which is to say, nobody can text me, nobody can email me. I'm just like in this little cone of like incommunicability or something, you know, and that's quite nice. But as for me doing so much writing on airplanes and in airports, I think that's just a function of how much I travel, really. Like, I'm not a person who only writes at home on my desk. I think I think if that's your role, then you're not going to get anything done, you know? So I just I've had to learn to write where, not just wherever, but everywhere, actually, if I want to keep moving forward.
Yeah. You continuing on this idea of like writing so much. I mean, I just think it's like liberating to hear you talk about it. It's just like so obviously natural, so obviously unselfconscious, just kind of pours out of you in an almost automatic way, it seems. And, you know, a lot of us kind of fuss a lot and kind of perseverate a lot about writing. But I guess I just wanted to ask you about like that particular aspect of you as a writer. It just like the way it just flows out. Like, so a couple of questions would be like, number one, was it always that way? Number two, like, do you sort of, what does that say about you as a writer? And like, why can't other writers do that, do you think?
It has always been that way for me. Yes, I remember taking workshops in graduate school. We, instead of having a submission cycle or schedule or anything, we just raised our hand at the end of workshop to ask if who was bringing next time, and I would always raise my hand every single time. And I never had a story, but I knew I could rig one up by Thursday, and I really subscribe to Ray Bradbury's dictum: write 52 stories a year, one every week. It's hard to write 52 bad stories in a row, And
that's great. What a great line. Oh,
okay. He was good, huh? But I do write a lot, and people ask sometimes as part of this question, what inspires you? But the answer to me is, I don't think I'm ever inspired, but I am compelled. And what I mean by that is that the world does not make sense to me. There's things that happen out there that just boggle my mind. I don't understand the motivations. I don't understand how an ordered system can be moving forward in this manner and all that. But give me a keyboard, give me a page, and I can go for 25 pages. I can go for 500 pages, and I can come up with a world that makes sense for the duration of that story. And so I guess what I'm saying is, because the world doesn't make sense, I hide in Storyland. And as the world continues to make less and less sense, I hide more and more. So I just write more and more and more. I feel like I'm always writing. And I guess I should also admit that I don't like chores. I don't like cleaning the gutters. I don't like mowing the grass. I don't like any of that stuff. But as long as I'm here at the keyboard, that counts as work. And so I hire somebody to mow the grass or whatever. And I'm totally happy with that.
What would you say? Something like a little like endorphin rush came through when you said like you like it when you can make a world make sense. And I just wanted to ask you about that. Like, what is the most satisfying part about writing for you? Is it when you get a great idea? Is it when a scene comes together? Like, what is the thing that like is like the real special sweet juice for you?
The special sweet juice with a writing project for me is usually about from 2/3 to 3/4 of the way through, because until then I'm stumbling and I have no idea how all this swirling stuff is supposed to plug together and achieve closure and resonance and all that stuff. And I'm always pretty sure it's never going to. But then right about that 2/3 or 3/4 mark, the story tends to like undulate into life in a way that I don't control, and it starts digesting itself such that it's pulling elements that I laid down on instinct forward and showing that they actually have purpose and they can form a mosaic or a narrative or something. And that to me is the wonderful part. It's just I can barely keep up with the last third of a story generally.
Amazing. And I know you don't write outlines, and maybe like you used to at the beginning of your career, but you don't now. Do you, building off your answer just there, do you have some idea like where you want to land? I mean, I guess like in horror generally, I mean, this book is so does a lot of kind of different things than a kind of classic horror story. But I mean, I guess like, you have the final girl, there's like, it's sort of a strict genre. You have a way that a story is usually supposed to end. But like, do you feel like you know where you're going to land, or are you just kind of, is it just, do you trust your instincts, or you like not knowing how it's going to end?
It's both of those. I trust my instincts, or I trust luck, really is what it is. And I never know how a thing is. Only one time in all these novels have I ever known how a book was going to end. And that was on complete accident. It was with Growing Up Dead in Texas, actually. I was about 25% of the way into that novel, and I wrote a scene that had a different like cadence to it, and I realized, oh man, that's an ending cadence. This is the last scene of the novel, and so I excised that, put it into a separate file, and kept it remote. But it was a different writing dynamic for me, because I knew I was heading towards that scene eventually, and the result of that was it allowed me to rely less on plot to knock that final domino down. I was able to go swerve and swing way to the sides, and it was really, really liberating. But that never happens. Like it's always just luck for me. Like, oh, this actually came together. This is a big surprise. The novel I just finished, I always say that these novels are going to fall apart, but writing this novel, I knew it was going to fall apart because there's no way it could work. But then it felt like magic, and it came together. Maybe that's what Alan Moore talks about with magic.
What is an ending cadence?
Kind of like you can hear the closing credit music between the lines a little bit. Like when you listen to an audiobook, if it's a good production, quite often the voice actor, I don't know if they do this on their own or if they're directed to do this, they hit a slightly different lope or cadence to that last paragraph or that last set of lines. And you, as the listener, you like, it turns up your senses because you're like, oh, it's almost over, and we do the same thing on the page. I think we just do it we do it with different tools,
Yeah. In the acknowledgments you wrote, I want to talk a little bit about some kind of like what famous, you're going to involve some kind of famous literary people in these next two questions. But one of them you brought into the conversation. You said you were describing what you do as a writer. And you said, quote, I just run along the splintery, decrepit fence between worlds and write down what I see from the crack and holes along the way. I don't think this is how Tolstoy did it. So, all right. Few things. First, how did Tolstoy do it, if not that way?
I think Tolstoy was like a master strategist or game player. Like like when I watch Game of Thrones and they're looking at that big stone table map of what Westeros, and they have like the armies, like it's like a big risk game, and they're pushing this there and that there. I feel like that's how Tolstoy wrote. He had a God view above it. Whereas I, as a writer, I feel like I'm the writer version of method acting. The only way I know to do it is to
that's good.
Put on the character's boots and drop into the story and look around and see where the door is and wonder why this person's doing that and figure it out as I go.
Yeah. Well, am I too like you're almost like begging the reader with that kind of quote to say that like, oh, like, well, that's like the grand classic way. But I mean, could you say that like is one better than the other? Is this God view better than your way in some sense?
I don't think there is a better way, and I don't think there's a better way to write either. I think any way that doesn't hurt people or things and produces a good story is the way to do it, And I don't think if it takes you 3 years, if it takes you 3 weekends, it doesn't matter at all, Actually, I get really what's the word? Not hostile, but I don't like it when I hear writers at a microphone saying, oh, this book took me 4 years of my life to write. And the onus is then on us. Oh, it took him that long. I better read this. And I just so resist that because it does not be Philip K. Dick. Take a lot of speed and write it in 48 hours. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me how fast you write it or anything like that. What matters is what's on the page.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I spent like 4 years writing my first book, and I just spent 4 months writing my most recent one. And it's like, there is something about writing quickly too, that I think a great thing about books that work is that they just seem to kind of like be of a unified consciousness. And it's sort of like, this is just capturing who I was and sort of what I was thinking about and all the little details. It's like maybe your car broke down while you were writing the book. And so there's a great car breaking down scene. And it's like, it's just all the quicker you write it, at least you have that, it will be a unified kind of personality that's presenting the work.
Exactly. And I think when you go quickly, you have less time to second guess yourself. You have less time to think. And I've never thought thinking is good for writing. I think thinking is good for thinking is good for revision, but it only slows you down for writing.
Do you spend a lot of time revising? Like if you're writing books in like 4 or 5 months, are you revising them in like how long are you spending?
I always, when I send my agent these books, I send it to her and I say, hey, a book. This is my final copy. I'm going to move on and write another one. And she emails it back to me after 2 or 3 days, and she says, this is the first draft. And and I want it to be the final draft. But that's cool. I mean, things need to get better, and this is how they get better is with notes, And so as for how long will revision take me, maybe Buffalo Hunter is a good example. Like I wrote Buffalo Hunter in 10 weeks, gave it to the editor and the agent at the same time because of time constraints. And then when I got the notes, I want to say it might have taken me between like 5 and 7 weeks to revise it. But that wasn't 5 to 7 weeks of me studiously sitting at the desk every day and writing, it was like 4 weeks of me saying, I'm going to quit writing. This is the stupidest thing ever. I do not like these notes. And then finally I was like, okay, maybe I'll try this out and see if it works. And so the actual pen to paper revision, 2 or 3 weeks, but me getting into a mental space where I don't want to quit being a writer, that takes longer. And I say quit being a writer. I don't think I could ever quit being a writer. I think if I get chased away from writing, then I'll find some other way to tell stories. You know, I don't think I can stop lying. I don't think I can stop connecting with people at that emotional and intellectual level, and that narrative level, I guess I should say. But nevertheless, I'm quite dramatic, you know. So when I get notes I don't like, I'm like, oh, this is it. I'm just gonna take my toys and go home. You know.
Yeah. I've heard you say you like to talk to geese. I mean, maybe you could just tell stories to geese. If like doesn't.
I do. I talk to a lot of animals. I talk to geese and squirrels and rabbits, and especially prairie dogs. I'm around prairie dogs a whole lot, so they hear a lot of things.
All right. T.S. Eliot, to bring in another big name here. I want to talk about the topic of this question is horror genre snobbery. So T.S. Eliot once wrote about Edgar Allan Poe that his work seems to show nothing but, quote, slipshod writing, puerile thinking, and haphazard experiments. T.S. Eliot went on to say that Poe had a powerful intellect is undeniable, but it seems to me the intellect of a highly gifted person before puberty. Your thoughts, sir?
My thought is I don't like T.S. Eliot. You know, yeah, I've never liked him saying that about Poe. I mean, it's easy to say that about somebody who's been dead for decades, who wrote in a different like mode with different tools with a different audience. You know, so I think it's just kind of mean to say in the first place. But I prefer Poe's work to T.S. Eliot's work. You know, which isn't to say I haven't used Eliot. Like I used his love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. I use Prufrock as the name of the town in the Indian Lake trilogy, you know, just because I did that mostly because I dislike Eliot, and so I thought it would be punishment to him to have his work incorporated into a pulpy horror novel.
Yeah. You know, you said, I've heard you talk about horror as you said, it's one of two genres that have a kind of visceral physical emotion at the center of it. The other is erotica. And it's funny when I heard you say that, I was like, God, you know, like horror really is just so elemental. I mean, you could could make an argument that the monster story is sort of like the original story, right?
I think so.
Yeah. And it makes you also think like, well, like whatever I'm writing, I heard you say in another interview, you were like, you know, storytelling, really, you try to never forget that it's campfire caveman stuff. And, you know, storytelling began with somebody kind of making a bunch of noises and saying like, I hunted this crazy animal 3 valleys over and here we are. But when I hear you talk like that, I'm just like, boy, like, why would you ever write anything else? Like, I mean, it just seems like, how can you put down a book that is like giving you such an immediate primal response?
No, I totally agree. And, you know, actually, I just read a story collection. It's an older one. It's called Corpus Christi by Brett Anthony Johnston. Really good stories. And what I noticed reading through those stories was that nearly every one of them bounces off or works through death of one of the characters. And it's really neat as a horror writer to read that, because the Corpus Christi stories to me are horror stories. It's just they're tailored for a much more subdued audience who doesn't like the teeth, doesn't like the blood on the wall, you know, but it's still confronting death and trying to process through this mortality that we all have and the fallout of it all.
Another sneaky take you have is that Waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett is horror. Explain.
It seems like it's an existential nightmare, you know. Like I really would have liked to see Philip K. Dick come at Waiting for Godot. I think he could have opened that story up in a way that would have made it have even more impact than it's had. I mean, that story is that play is one of the big things, you know, of the 20th century, of course, but I think Philip K. Dick could have made it fun, you know.
Yeah. I think it's pretty fun. And I read that thing every maybe like 8 or 9 years, and I'm just like, and it makes me laugh. I mean, in that very existential gallows.
Yeah. But that laughter is so essential to horror. Like
Yeah.
laughter is the pressure release valve that keeps things from coming up to a screechy plateau and then having no variation. Laughter lets us reset and go up and down over and over. And the good writers like Beckett, they knew that. They knew you had to put the giggles in there. You had to have some chuckles. When I read something without a grin that doesn't have a grin built into it, then I realize it's not about my world, because my world, no matter what bad stuff is going on, there's somebody always over in the corner chuckling, you know?
Well, I mean, another way to read what you just said is that,
Mm.
like, if there isn't a grin in it, then maybe the book just doesn't have enough pressure to need one, right?
That's
Like,
a good point. Yeah, I never thought of it like that. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Or, I think most writers do get their unique take onto the page, and that unique take is often humorous.
Mhm.
However, it takes risk to tell a joke. You have to make yourself vulnerable. You have to extend yourself. And because people want to feel safe, they go through and comb their own humor out, and they leave the grim stuff, the sad stuff, the flat stuff. And I don't think that serves anybody. Like George Saunders says, he did that for a long time after grad school, and he finally decided to let the absurd stuff stay, and then he became king of the world as far as writing goes.
Yeah, that's one of the great kind of self-realization stories is George Saunders realizing that, like, if I can make my wife laugh, this is like my future, and like the rest is history.
Exactly.
All right. So one more question for me, and then I have a great audience question I want to get to. Sometimes I do this with anybody who's a teacher of writing, and you teach at UC Boulder. It's called a 2-minute MFA. I know it's an impossible task, but like, I guess, not all of us can like take your course at UC Boulder, but like imagine that we could, and imagine that we've been with you for a year or 2 years even, learning, everything you have to teach us. Give us like one thing that you would hope that every student of yours like leaves with, something that maybe like particularly something that they would learn from you rather than other teachers of writing.
I think if I could leave my students with one thing, it would be to convince them of the usefulness and the necessity, actually, of reading outside their chosen genre. Like, say that they want to write science fiction. That's great and wonderful. Yes, read all the science fiction you can. You got to know what's been done and how it's been done. But like, I think of genres as fields with fences around them along a river or something. And so you live in science fiction. That's your field. But in order to keep your field vital, it's incumbent upon you to step over that fence and go walk in, I don't know, paleoanthropology and memoir and historical fiction and horror. And then at dusk, you come back and step over that fence and come back to your home field. But what's happened is the burrs from those other genres have stuck to your pants leg, and they fall off and they grow up and they contribute new DNA to science fiction. And that's how you make your genre better. I think if you are in science fiction or in horror and romance or whatever, and you only read science fiction, romance, or horror, then the work you produce can tend towards the insular, where it's only speaking to people within that field. And you do have to speak to those people. You have to do what they expect you to do, but you also want to talk to the whole world. And the way to do that is to make your genre vital, to walk in other fields, to pull some horror in, pull some paleobotany in, pull some space opera in.
Do you feel like you try to guide? I'm curious, like your students, do they come in already? I mean, because they're students. I mean, these people are like 18, 19 years old. Like, do most of them already know what genre they want to be in? Are you trying to guide them toward genre? Are you trying to say keep an open mind?
Keep an open mind. I usually encounter them when they're about 21 or 22, when they're juniors and seniors and graduate students, of course. And by the time they're seniors and graduate students, they generally know where they're happy, anyways. But when I first started teaching, for the first, I think it was 8 or 10 years of teaching fiction workshops, I would put on my syllabus, in this course, you're going to write one genre story, a zombie story, a princess story, a space opera, whatever. And hands would go up. People would say, really? And I would say, really? And without fail, 2 or 3 people would get up and, as protest, walk out of the class and drop it. And so what? I didn't need them there anyways, of course. But come about 2008, 2010, there was a sea change, and I quit having to put that on my syllabus, because every student that comes in is writing genre. That's what they want to do. That's where they live. That's where they feel good. And I don't know what caused that change. Actually, it could be Marvel movies, it could be video games, it could just be a bigger undulation that I just can't really access. I don't know, but I'm thrilled by it. But at the same time, these students who are in with both feet into horror, science fiction, fantasy, whatever, I also feed them literary stuff, because you can't just read the fantasy, the horror, the science fiction. You've got to just read everything.
Yeah. That is so interesting. I've never heard anybody say that, but I feel the same thing, that there was this sea change. I mean, whether it was 2008, I mean, who knows? But like, yes, like sort of around that time, maybe if there's an element of like, you know, these like big powerhouse critical establishments, like, you know, taking those writers seriously. Like Stephen King really sort of came out of one universe and became like, you know, published in the New Yorker all the time. And I think also, I'm just speculating off the top of my head here, but it's like, I think there's just been a way that like these genre writers have really shown both cultural relevance, and there's money there. Like that is what people have seen. Like a lot of these books get, I mean, like, you know, J.K. Rowling's a billionaire. Like, I mean, it's just, there's a lot of cultural and, you know, capital respect going to these areas.
No, you're totally right. You know, I wonder if Gino Diaz's Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde in like 2006, if it went in the Pulitzer, if that was also something that contributed to the door opening, because Oscar Wilde he's a comic book dude, you know, like I'm not saying that legitimized genre, but that pulled genre into like a literary domain in a different way than it had really been done before.
All right. Well, look, let's take one question from the audience. It's a question from Jason. Jason Rizos, thank you for this question. I know Jason, he actually makes beer, delicious beer, and he's also a great writer. Jason says, hi guys, thanks for this great interview. Stephen, what horror writers were you reading early in your career that had an influence on the kind of writing you wanted to do?
You know, the first horror I encountered was Ray Bradbury's story, The Veldt, from the Martian Chronicles, I guess. And that's a scary story. That's still a scary story, I think. And then a story called The Stone Boy. But and then I was also encountering kind of cosmic horror and all the Conan the Barbarian stuff I was reading in my like junior high years. But then I discovered science thrillers, and they always had horror elements in them, but it wasn't strictly horror. It was science fiction more. And I didn't discover Stephen King until 1988 with Tommyknockers. And then through King, I discovered, you know, Barker and Straub and just the whole, everybody else like spilled through the door after King, after Tommyknockers, which was wonderful. So I'm not directly answering your question though. Who influenced me when I was starting out writing horror? You know, I wonder. My first horror novel, like I said, was Demon Theory. Like it was either 05 or 06. I can't remember anymore. And I think Sarah Grant's Come Closer had come out by then. And that novel, that little novella, whatever it is, that really impacted me a lot. And I hope it's 03. I could be lying, but anyways, what that was. Sarah Grant's That Come Closer, which I think Paul Tremblay recommended to me so many years ago. So thanks to him. That was kind of like a pole star for me anyways.
Wow. Great. Awesome. All right. Well, I always end the interview with the same question. I asked the author, so back to Buffalo Hunter. You know, imagine that there's like the ideal reader for this book, and they're picking up everything you're putting down, just sort of receiving the book in the way you hoped it would be received in your wildest dreams. They finish reading Buffalo Hunter, put it on their lap, they look out the window. Tell us in a phrase or even like a single word, how does this reader feel?
Exhilarated. I think that's what I'm always going for. I want the reader to feel exhilarated.
That's awesome. That is awesome. And then like 150 times asking that question. No one has ever said that, but why? Books are exhilarating.
Yeah. I think they should be, you know?
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, folks, the book is called Buffalo Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. Stephen, thank you so much for taking some time to be on the show today. This was awesome. It was just as great as I hoped it would be. I really, really appreciate it.
Man, it was an honor talking to you. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, everybody. And thanks for everybody who joined. Sorry we didn't get to all the questions, but we'll see you next week on Thoughtful Bro.